I am so excited to announce that I have released the first official tarot diagnosis spread book. Tarot and Self-Discovery is a therapeutic tarot journey with over 200 spreads, including over 152 card prompts and over 50 robust tarot spreads. You can purchase a physical copy on Amazon or a digital copy at thetarotdiagnosis.com. You are listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. We are getting nerdy today. I'm really excited. Recently, inside the Tarot Diagnosis membership community, the symposium, I hosted a workshop on tarot and social psychology. And the workshop was super fun, and I had a really good time really diving into the concept and the field of social psychology and figuring out ways to combine tarot and ways to deepen our relationship to the cards through the lens of social psychology. So I decided I should do an episode on it. So social psychology is essentially the study of how we as individuals think and feel and behave in connection to other people or groups of people. And the whole goal of social psychology is to help identify which sort of social constructs or mechanisms of groups essentially kind of govern or influence our relationships and the perceptions that we have about ourselves and the people around us. Some of these mechanisms that I'm talking about can come from cultural norms, societal expectations, different dynamics in group settings, different relationships that we develop or maintain, and even the way we've been taught to think and feel based on observations that we've made of other people. And we all know that tarot is completely independent from the study of human behavior, but we also know that tarot is an incredibly potent tool for self-reflection and self-discovery. And so it really made sense to apply the concept and the archetypes of tarot into this world of social psychology in order to help us both shed light on how our minds work individually and socially, and also strengthen our relationship to tarot. So the kind of core foundation of social psychology and social psychology and sociology are two different. I probably should have prefaced that earlier, but social psychology really focuses on looking at, exploring and understanding how our experiences as individuals are influenced or how they function within a social setting, whereas sociology focuses on the actual group dynamics and the group experiences. So from a social psychology perspective, we're looking at the individual in the context of a social or group setting. And social psychologists believe that our behaviors and our beliefs, the way we think, the way we feel and act, are all influenced by not only our internal processes, like the way we think, the way our brain works, our emotions, but also these external variables like different cultural norms, like I had talked about, group dynamics, relationship structures, and social structures. And tarot can come in and help us kind of like understand these complexities and dynamics, because often, we have these experiences and we have these thoughts and feelings that maybe we're not entirely able to access, where when we pull a card, something then bubbles up to the surface and allows us to explore the subconscious aspects of our mind and is able to allow us to kind of walk through a new door and see a new vantage point on some of these internalized beliefs, some of our motivations, and even interpersonal dynamics that we have. One of the reasons I believe tarot is so aptly connected to psychology, and now specifically this topic of social psychology is because the act of interpreting tarot means that we are inherently working with narratives and symbols that represent the collective unconscious and universal themes and experiences. And it's these universal themes and narratives that essentially act as a catalyst for us to self-reflect and find meaning or make meaning, or even encourage ourselves or other people to take a closer look at our personal narratives within a larger context, specifically a social context, and really dive into why do we think, feel, and behave the way that we do. It's by examining these themes and different patterns that end up coming up in tarot based on the different cards we pull and the placement of these cards that can help us develop a better understanding of how our experiences and relationships and membership in different groups or cultures end up shaping the way that we think, feel, and behave on an individual level. There are 4 main components that are often researched in social psychology that I want to focus on for part of this episode. And these are the 4 constructs that I focused on inside the workshop on tarot and social psychology, inside the symposium as well. And they're power and authority, and conformity and prejudice. So power is this ubiquitous force that is often represented by someone or a group's ability to influence and control others. And like I said, this could be an individual, it could be a group, some sort of organization, think like governments. And this power shapes the distribution of resources that we experience or maybe have access to, as well as opportunities and even privilege within society. Authorities often linked with power, and they often get mixed up because they're so similar. So authority, closely linked to power, refers to someone or some group's perceived right or entitlement to exercise some form of control over a person or a group of people. And authority is usually conferred by social norms, formal positions of power or leadership, different traditions, especially cultural traditions, and the experience of authority has a huge influence on how individuals perceive and then respond to the commands or directives of those in a position of authority. Conformity is our tendency to modify the way that we think, the way we behave, our attitudes or beliefs in order to fit in or align with whatever group we are trying to become a part of or are a part of, or some way to fit into or align with a social norm. And conformity can be, it can come in lots of different forms. It could be very subtle, or the pressure to conform could be subtle. It's little social cues, or it could be overt pressure, someone actually telling you, you have to do this or you have to be this. And conformity has underlying themes of power because conformity itself exerts a powerful influence on how individuals end up making decisions, which then influences the cohesion of a group. And prejudice is the preconceived notions or ideas that we have that are essentially stereotypes that we hold towards individuals or groups of people based on whatever group they belong to or culture they belong to or whatever their social category is. And prejudice can manifest and often manifests in discriminatory behaviors. And these behaviors can be implicit or overt. And prejudice is what often perpetuates the inequalities and social divisions that we experience in our society. One of the exercises in the Tarot and Social Psychology workshop was to either go through your deck and choose cards that represent these 4 social psychology constructs, power, authority, conformity, and prejudice, or to shuffle and blindly pull. And folks in the workshop, it was kind of split down the middle, if I remember correctly. Some liked to blindly pull and others liked to go in and choose. I decided to choose, and I chose the Empress to represent power, the Emperor to represent authority, the 3 of Cups to represent conformity, and then Justice to represent prejudice. So I want to start with the Empress as power. I feel like the Empress is the ultimate creator, and not just the creator of life as it's often portrayed, but anything from tangible goods to imaginary worlds. The Empress really breathes life into our imagination. And that alone is a source of power and a display of power. But it's really the overflowing resources at her disposal that make me think about her as a sign of power. So earlier I spoke about how power shapes the distribution of resources, opportunities, and privileges within society. If we take a closer look at the imagery here, it's clear that the Empress is in a position to dictate what resources go where and who gets what. And we aren't really sure what's driving her decisions. Upright, we can assume that it is equality and goodwill that drives her, but reversed, this distribution of resources, for example, might be driven by selfishness or greed. The Emperor as an archetype of authority is really what the majority of us link, power and authority to when we think of a tarot card and these two themes, and really rightfully so. Often the Emperor will willingly step into this role of authority, usually because they feel as though it's their right or maybe their responsibility to exert some sort of control or gain control over a group or a situation. Just like the power of the Empress, this could be benevolent or malevolent, and intention is really important to explore here. Not all authority is bad, and not all authority is good, just like not all power is bad or all good. The Three of Cups makes for a fitting archetype for conformity, which I feel like is pretty obvious. So when I look at this traditional imagery, I can't help but wonder what parts of themselves are each of these people holding back, and which parts of themselves do they feel like they must display in order to fit in. From a biological and evolutionary perspective, conformity isn't inherently bad. For a long time, we needed to conform in order to survive, but now that's not entirely necessary. So moving on to justice as prejudice. Justice really encourages us to confront our own prejudices. So these, preconceived notions or stereotypes that we hold towards individuals or groups. I really like the way Rachel Pollack describes justice in 78 Degrees of Wisdom. I'm paraphrasing this, but she talks about how the psychic laws of justice and our ability to understand the past and move forward is dependent upon seeing and acknowledging the truth about ourselves and how we are perceiving life around us. Justice really encourages us to right our wrongs and reflect on how we can do better moving forward so that the world is a more equitable place. And that requires us to reflect on the role of prejudice in our life. Another fun and important component of social psychology is how attitudes and actions feed each other. So as individuals, as we're navigating our interactions with others and with society as a whole, our attitudes, the way we assess situations, the way we think and feel and believe regarding people, places, and things play a really big role in molding the way we respond and the way we act. Conversely, actions can also influence our attitudes, which then results in this dynamic feedback loop where one informs and strengthens the other in terms of attitudes and actions. So attitudes can operate as triggers for action, altering how we perceive and respond to social cues. And social psychologists have been researching the function of attitudes in predicting and guiding behavior for quite some time. And they found that attitudes can be significant predictors of how people approach and respond to social situations and make decisions. Also, social norms, which are these implicit or explicit rules that govern kind of the acceptable behavior within a group or society, tend to put a lot of pressure on people to conform to these dominant attitudes and actions. And conformity to social norms often influences the way we form and express our individual attitudes. And this is where that feedback loop I was talking about occurs, especially in a social context, and then perpetuates specific patterns of behavior. This is where tarot can come in and be fun and enlightening, especially when we're trying to deepen our understanding and knowledge of the cards and how the cards function and interact with each other. One of the things I hear a lot that folks struggle with is how to read cards together. So as I was reflecting on this concept of attitudes and actions, especially within the framework of social psychology, I was thinking about how tarot, specifically for self-reflection, offers this, unique glimpse into our own personal relationship to the world and the things around us. And I thought it must function the same when it comes to looking at attitudes and actions within the context of social psychology. Because by looking deeper into the archetypal imagery of the cards and then engaging in that, intuitive, introspective, internal dialogue, we're able to better understand, why we are the way we are. And so it would make sense to apply the same concept in order to gain a deeper understanding of, the complex interplay between different archetypes in the deck. So I thought it might be interesting to spend some time exploring the attitudes and actions of the cards in tarot and see how they shape and influence each other. And if that feedback loop I was talking about earlier also exists within reading tarot. So for this, I would love for you to pull alongside me. I'm about to shuffle and we're going to pull 2 cards and we're going to be talking about attitudes and actions. So as we are shuffling and pulling, we're going to be thinking about what are the attitudes of each card that we pulled? What are the actions of each card? And then how does the attitude of card A feed the actions of card B? And then how does the attitude of card B feed the actions of card A? And I, again, am using Tarot Vintage. It's been difficult for me to use different decks over the last, month maybe. I've just been feeling called to the comfort of Tarot Vintage. So that's what I've been using. All right, let's pull our first card, card A. Okay, so card A is the 4 of Swords. Let's pull card B. And as you do this exercise with me, please send me an email. Let me know what you got. When we were doing this live in the workshop, it was interesting because folks thought this was a pretty challenging but rewarding exercise. They found that it was really difficult to think about the attitudes of the card versus the actions. And that was interesting because there was me and maybe, a couple other people who were the opposite. So for me, it was really easy to think about the attitudes represented in the card, but the actions were, it was a little bit more difficult for me. I had to spend more time thinking about that. So I would love to hear feedback from you all, what you found to be the easier of the 2. All right. One more shuffle and we'll get card B. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, 5 of Swords. All right, so we have card A is 4 of Swords, card B is 5 of Swords. So let's think about the attitudes of each card. So right away with 4 of Swords, I'm immediately thinking about avoidance and avoidant attachment maybe. So avoidant, complacent, maybe even unbothered. There's this attitude of, I don't care, or that doesn't matter to me, or I'm not going to allow that to matter to me. This unbothered feeling doesn't have to be a negative. It could be, I'm not going to allow something like that to bother me. 5 of Swords. So the attitude of 5 of Swords feels very entitled, maybe competitive, and depending on what they're experiencing, maybe even a little hostile. So those are the attitudes. I'm thinking of those 2 cards. So let's move on to the actions. The actions of 4 of Swords, obviously they're laying down. Their eyes are closed, so they could be sleeping, they could be resting. I'm thinking maybe they're isolating. They are removing themselves from a situation, removing themselves from maybe even a certain mindset, especially when we were thinking about conformity and prejudice. There could be some reflection happening here. Perhaps they are meditating there, but there's an action of being alone and working through something or removing the self from something. So the actions of Five of Swords. So this one's very different from Four of Swords. This one feels more grabby, like these are mine and you can't have them. Maybe a little opportunistic, these, when we think of the Five of Swords, we think about this person taking these swords and these other folks walking away. But if we look at this through the lens of maybe this person being grabby or plotting, and maybe being an opportunist, these folks have their backs turned. And I wonder if those swords belong to those people who have their backs turned. And, the person in the foreground took advantage of that. So perhaps the actions here are, taking advantage of folks or being grabby. Now that I'm looking at this card and thinking about it, I'm thinking about prejudice and justice and how I wonder if I had chosen or pooled justice for this exercise, how the feedback loop would look here. Let's actually move on to this kind of feedback loop. So how does the attitude of card A feed the actions of card B? So the attitude of card A, which is the Four of Swords, is, avoidant, complacent, unbothered, could make the Five of Swords actually feel anxious. Like maybe they have to plot and plan because it's really easy to misconstrue avoidant or complacent attitudes. So, and it's interesting because when I'm looking at these two together, the Four of Swords is first, and they are laying down and they're facing the opposite direction. They're facing, looking up, but their head is, back of their head, top of their head is at the Five of Swords, and the Five of Swords is looking towards the Four of Swords. And a lot of times when you have someone who is maybe avoidantly attached, for example, and they have this avoidant tendency, they tend to attract folks who are anxiously attached. And anxiously attached people will do whatever they can in order to feel more secure with the avoidantly attached person. So they will plot and grab and do whatever they can to get some sort of reaction or reassurance or information from the avoidantly attached person. So that's interesting. That's how these two are kind of existing with each other right now and how they're informing one another. So how does the attitude of card B, the Five of Swords, feed the actions of card A, the Four of Swords? So this is interesting, especially if we're talking about this through the lens of attachment now. There's a couple different ways I want to look at it. Just to continue with the theme of attachment, the anxiety of the Five of Swords to get information, especially because the swords is the cognition and intellectual suit. It's trying to grab thoughts, to gain knowledge. And if the avoidant person is not giving that, the Five of Swords is going to do whatever they can to get something. So this behavior, even though the Five of Swords is, and the anxiously attached person is trying to get more information, they're actually working against themselves because it will cause the Four of Swords, avoidantly attached person, to move further away and close themselves off even more. But to step away from the attachment style interpretation here, if we're looking at the Five of Swords as being entitled and competitive and hostile, that attitude could cause the Four of Swords to be someone who sets rigid boundaries. So the attitude of the Five of Swords being entitled feeds the action of the Four of Swords to become pretty rigid with their boundaries because maybe they don't want to be around someone who's like that. So I would love to hear what you all pool and what your interpretation of this attitudes and actions feedback loop is. I would also love to hear your insight on the cards that I pulled, the Four of Swords and the Five of Swords. This is, just strictly off the top of my head. So, if I spent, a bit more time with these cards, I might, come up with something a little bit more in depth. But I would love to hear what your thoughts are on this and whether or not you thought it was easy or if maybe identifying the attitudes was easy and the actions was difficult or vice versa. Thank you so much for listening to the Tarot Diagnosis. For more tarot and mental health content, follow the Tarot Diagnosis on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and sign up to receive the Tarot Diagnosis emails, where you'll have access to exclusive spreads and exciting announcements. To join an incredible community of tarot and psychology enthusiasts, join the Tarot Diagnosis membership community, The Symposium, by visiting thetarotdiagnosis.com.